The Brennan Center for Justice is criticizing the legislative redistricting process because the panel in charge is ignoring a new law that requires prisoners to be counted at their last home address and not in the facilities where they are doing their time. That law is being challenged in court by the Senate Republicans. They argue that it disenfranchises upstate voters. However, the Brennan Center says that without an injunction or another court order, that law should stand. Joining me now from New York City to explain more about this is the Brennan Center's Wendy Weiser. Wendy, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So just to explain a little more here, if you would just tell the viewers what is at stake. We have discussed this issue about prison redistricting, but you basically are saying we're talking about 56,000 people who are a little bit in limbo.
Yeah, that's right. We have recent media reports and public statements suggest that LATFOR, the state body that is responsible for redrawing New York's district lines for redistricting purposes, is not planning on complying with the recent law ending prison-based gerrymandering in the state.
Right.
And there are 56,000 people who would be affected, whose apportionment and allocation would be affected by this. Under the prior practice, which was extremely unfair, we artificially inflated the voting rights of people who live near prisons at the expense of everyone else in New York, and especially at the expense of people who live in districts with high incarceration rates, like many African American and Latino communities in the state. So we saw a real distortion of political power. That has been corrected. It is now the law of the state, and LATFOR is obligated to comply with that.
Let me just ask, these people, when you say artificially inflated the voting rights of the people who live around these prisons, what we're talking about is really Republican-controlled districts, essentially, in upstate New York that have population drain over the last decade and really count on these prisoners to boost up their numbers, except those prisoners are not voting. Correct? You know, the prisoners are not voting in New York while they are in prison. Interestingly, they're actually in prison for a very short period of time. The median incarceration time is 25 months, and in any particular facility it's only 7 months, whereas the redistricting process lasts for a whole decade. So someone is being allocated to a community where they're only there for a very short period of time at the expense of their home community and at the expense of every other community in New York that doesn't have a prison. So the Republicans, though, say, and the folks who live around these prisons and elected officials in the area say, well, wait a minute now, we're providing services to these facilities. We provide water, we provide protection in case there's a fire, we provide law enforcement in case there's a breakout, for example. And so therefore, shouldn't the people around the prisons have a say, and perhaps more so, of what's going on there?
You know, certainly most of these services are paid for outside of these districts. They are paid for by state and federal resources. You are allocated to a particular prison district regardless of whether any resources are being, any county or local resources are being used. And we end up with huge distortions that are really unrelated to the financial needs of those communities.
So what you say in this letter, and the letter was sent actually not just by the Brennan Center, but also by the New York Civil Liberties Union and Demos and a bunch of other folks, the Prison Policy Initiative. You sent this to the members of LATFOR, who are actually holding a bunch of public hearings, and we've discussed this on the show. They are moving forward with redistricting, even though the governor has said that he will he will veto anything that is not done by an independent body. You say it would be a serious violation of legal obligations to go forward as they are. Why not challenge them in a lawsuit?
Well, you know, right now we have just learned that they have stated that they plan not to comply with the law. We certainly hope that they will be persuaded that this is their legal obligation. They have absolutely no authority and no justification for refusing to comply with the law. So, you know, there is a current lawsuit pending challenging the law by some of the members in prison districts that would be affected by this. But that is, that lawsuit. There's been no court finding that there's any problem with this law.
Right.
And in fact, this law is not only a good law, but brings New York practice in line with the federal Constitution and with other New York constitutional provisions. So right now, there's really no justification for them to refuse to comply with the law, and we hope that they will just adhere to their obligations.
Okay, but if they don't, just to be clear, have you ruled out the possibility that you would bring a lawsuit, you and your allies here would bring a lawsuit to try and compel them to do so legally?
Yeah, no, certainly our clients who we are representing in the other litigation and our co-counsel have not ruled out any possibilities. We are open to all possibilities, but we are certainly hoping that LAT4 will just do the right thing and comply with the law.
Okay, so what's really interesting about this is that last night we got a statement from the Democratic Assembly. All right, and they basically said, yeah, we agree with the Brennan Center. We think, in fact, that LAT4 should be using this law, should be employing it rather, and which actually was part of a budget that was signed into law when David Patterson was in office, and it was also passed when the Senate was controlled by Democrats. So the Assembly Democrats say, yeah, we think this is a great idea. The problem is that LAT4 is bipartisan, and as you mentioned, the Senate Republicans are suing, and so it seems to me that they're at a little bit of a deadlock politically.
Certainly, but the obligation to follow the law is holds true whether or not you agree with the law, whether or not you think it politically benefits you or anyone else. This is Democrats and Republicans alike are obligated to follow the law. So while that's an interesting sideshow, they have to comply with the law.
Well, so do you think that the Democrats are punting when they say, well, we agree, but there's really nothing we can do because actually this is bipartisan and we don't control this particular committee?
This is a bipartisan committee, and certainly both sides should comply with the law. They have not been extraordinarily transparent with respect to their operations and how it is that they're making their decisions. And we certainly hope that both the Democrats and the Republicans that are on this committee on LAT4 will do their utmost to perform their legal obligation under the law.
Okay, so you have given these folks a deadline of August 12th for a response. That's what you are hoping. And if you do not get a response, or if you get a response and they say, sorry, but no, because we have this pending litigation and we disagree with your legal argument, what will you do? At this point, we and our clients will still consider all of our legal obligations. Nothing is off the table. There is certainly no legal justification that LAT4 could put forward for not complying with the law. There is no authority or ground that they can stand on that. Okay. All right. So we'll be following this story. In the meantime, I want to thank you very much for coming in to talk to us about it. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.